Thank the church for coming to visit with me. Talk about reconciliation. Look at where it is that we are going as nations of peoples. And tobacco was given for me to come and gather with you, to come and share the culture of our people. And when we gather, we're having to think about that. Not everyone is going to be at the same level. So to ensure that no one gets lost along the way, you always go back to that beginning time to bring them up to speed, so to speak, and hope that they too will be able to follow along. That takes time. It takes much time. We see that from the process of education, schooling. And as I was having a chat with a couple of gentlemen, our language, it's structured such that when you are born, it's like coming from a point in time. And then as you go, it broadens. Somewhat different from the way that English language is structured. Very, very point focused, looking at little bits and pieces of the world. And then you're told how to pick up those pieces, make those pictures. And for many, as you go back and take a look at walking that journey where you're able to make and pick up those pictures for yourself, you begin to realize that many have been left out, or there are maybe many that have not been shared with you. So you begin to question the legitimacy of your being. In our world, this is in part what that residential school was about. The cleansing of your memory so that new ideas can be planted. The cleansing of you as a human being, thinking that for some reason there's something wrong with you. In our culture, within our stories, we don't see that. We talk about being born pure and sacred because we are part of our Creator. That's where there's trouble today. Coming to look at that beginning, taking a look at yourself from birth, taking a look at the emergence of your nation of peoples. Because we say that teaching comes from our Creator. It's been given to us to show us how to live in harmony. And it's a challenge to take this kind of knowledge and transfer it to the generations that are coming behind. Because it has been upset. So I thank you for gathering and listening to me. I know you're going to be gathering up at the lodge. So this place here, we're going to light up this bowl with my tobacco that I have been given. We pray for our Creator to come and gather with us, to watch over what we are doing, to guide us as we walk in life, so that we can do that good work for the future generations of our children. Not to lose our relationship with our Creator, but to reinforce and strengthen that relationship as we journey. So dear Creator, we ask you to come and be with us. And we thank you for giving us these resources so that we can light up this fire bringing the grandfathers here, which are present in these stones which have been brought here. We say that these are our grandmother and grandfather from ancient times past. And the little ones, we look at them as grandchildren. They are learning. They are learning. And for this water here, carried along, give it to our grandmas who are gathered with us to help them. Give them a drink, give them a bath. They're thirsty. As he goes around, my helper here, think about your family, think about your life, think about your community. Because our world today needs the kind of story which is contained within this center of our people. It's a good way to live, but you have to have an open mind and an open heart to see. You have to hear those stories, come to know so that you can understand. Very similar to what we see in that book we call the Bible. Filled with treasures of good stories. Ours has to be added to that book. It's not yet there. But in time it will be, because it's our journey.
My name is Jordan Cantwell. I live in Treaty 6 territory in Saskatoon, and I'm currently serving as the moderator for the United Church of Canada. So very honored to be here today. And we're all here today because of the history that we share. Some of us had the honor of being down at the Sacred Fire near the cairn with Elder Art Patatagus, and to receive the teachings that he shared about the spiritual history of Turtle Island. Those stories and those teachings come from a time before Europeans came to this country, and before those stories and that wisdom an attempt was made to vanquish it, to silence it. Fortunately, it was a failed attempt. But the apology that we are acknowledging today and celebrating today comes out of that history of trying to silence those voices and to end those stories. We are here to acknowledge the journey that we have been on together for many years, and to commemorate a particular time that changed our journey together. A time when Indigenous members of the United Church said that they were owed an apology for the Church's role in devaluing their spiritualities and their cultures. We're here to commemorate a time when the Church responded to that call for an apology, and a time when Indigenous peoples challenged us to live up to the words we spoke in that apology. And we are so grateful that so many of you are here today. People from Newfoundland to British Columbia, those who were here 30 years ago, and members of their families. We're grateful that a member of our Full Communion partnership, the United Church of Christ, is also with us today. And we welcome and celebrate that there's a new generation of United Church leadership here as well. So as we gather, we sense the Creator's presence with us, continuing with us on this journey.
I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the staff and executive of Manitou Conference. And I'd like to say a very few words about the cairn site where the 1986 apology was given. I speak to you this afternoon as someone who has worshipped at the cairn site many times. As someone who has led worship there, I can tell you that reading the words of apology at the cairn is an incredibly moving experience. Now, I'm of Irish and Welsh ancestry, and my Indigenous spirituality speaks of thin places where the divine comes close to earth. And the cairn site is a thin place where holy words of reconciliation and repentance were spoken. I also speak to you as someone who has cut grass and picked up garbage and reset stones as part of Sudbury Presbytery work crews. I see the faces of those who have cared for the cairn since its completion 28 years ago. And many of those folks are gone now. We in Manitou have been stewards of the cairn for 28 years. The cairn was very much a response of reconciliation by non-Indigenous United Church members to the 1986 apology, possibly one of the earliest and most enduring. It was undertaken in consultation with and cooperation with First Nations people. Art Solomon, a local elder and mason, designed and supervised the construction. And the stone of the base was donated by the Whitefish River First Nation, which is on the way to Manitoulin Island. In a short time, after we've finished here, we'll be walking down to the cairn site, perhaps a journey that's symbolic of how far we have come in our reconciliation. When this celebration is complete, we'll have to walk back up that hill for our feast here at Huntington, and that's a much more strenuous walk. I think that's probably symbolic of how far we've yet to go. Miigwech.
I'm honored to be here. I'm so grateful that I'm still here and allowed to be here. Well, at home, I come from the Legalto Nation. We are 4 tribes of that nation. The Wewake is Cape Mount, which is Tukwalooten, and Wewakam is Campbell River on Vancouver Island, and Comox down in the Courtenay-Comox Valley, and Quechua, which is in Phillips Arm, in one of our inlets north of us. And my grandfather, we have 3 children, 3 daughters. We lost our older daughter to cancer 10 years ago. And our remaining daughters are equally as important in the churches as I was and am still. When we came here years ago, our youngest daughter, Susan, was with me, and she was only 18 at the time. Now I have her daughter with me, Kita. And I'm just really honored that I'm still here and they can still know the history of what happened. I had to go to, well, I was sent to General Council exec with Stan Mackay and Thelma Davies. I'll never forget that moment when we got there. People were looking at us like, where did you come from? Who let you in the door? The only person that was so happy to see me especially was Lois Wilson. She had come to our village twice, so she knew about us and knew how we lived. But in grade 4, I learned people looked at us differently. I didn't know that in my village. Not until I had to go to public school in grade 4. And I love to read because my grandmother taught herself to read from the Bible. So she read to me all the time. And so I liked to read in grade 4 in school. One day, everybody started laughing. And I stopped reading and I said, why are you laughing? And they said, we're laughing at you because you talk funny. And I thought, no, I don't. I know who I am, so it must be all of you. So that's where I learned we were looked at differently. But I knew who I was. A lot of our children didn't know because they were taken away. And my parents went to residential school the grandparents kept us in our culture. Granny Addie said, don't forget your song, don't forget your dance, don't forget your language, don't forget who you are, don't forget your name. And my grandfather was a very prominent person in my life. He used to take me to all the presbyteries and conferences when I was a girl, young teenager, and I loved to go because it meant I was going to go here and there and everywhere. And what I remember about those gatherings was how joyful everyone was when they were singing. When I was a little girl, one day my grandfather said to me, God has a purpose for you, but we don't know what it is yet. I didn't know what he meant. I had no idea what he meant, but I never forgot it. And one day it came to me when I went to General Council Exec. Thelma and Stan and I met the night before to figure out what we were going to do when we were on the next day on the agenda. And there was something called a blue book, where there were promises that the church would do for the Native people. And so I went through that list and I asked Stan, have they done this? There must have been 16 or more items. And he said, no, not as far as I know. And I said, well, you and Thelma talk first and I'll talk last. And at that moment I said to Stan and Thelma, I think I'm going to ask the church to apologize. And Thelma said, why? And I looked at Stan, and of course he was looking at me and kind of smiling. He said, if you think that's what you have to do, go ahead. And we didn't discuss it. I didn't know that he had to bring a resolution into General Council. We just did it. And I'll never forget that day, because it seems like yesterday. I was sitting right next to Bob. And standing next to him, he was sitting beside me. And I was in the presence of so many learned people. I thought, I have to have degrees behind my name. So I made some up. I had a WF, I was a wife and friend to my husband. I had an MPB, I was a mother of 3 daughters. My most important degree was, I had an FP, I was a Fisher person. And then I was equal. I put myself on a higher level, so I was not afraid. I could feel my grandfather standing beside me, very strongly. And I knew then that was my purpose. That's what he meant. I don't take this too lightly, because I speak for the old people who taught us so much. They were very spiritual people. They talked to the Creator all the time, all day long. We were thankful for everything. My grandfather said, if you go to visit your friend, you don't go there to mess up their house. You go there to have a nice visit. That's how we have to live on earth. We have to take care of this place we're at right now. My grandfather was a man of few words, but they were very powerful. He was a powerful man. very spiritual. They considered themselves Christian people, the old people in my reserve. But they never forgot their culture, never forgot who they were, kept their language, kept their song, kept their dance. My granny taught us our dance when we were little, but she used to pull our curtains. Yeah, they were still afraid. I was just little, but that's a long time ago. But anyway, it feels like I've been telling my story over and over again. And that's how it happened, because I listened to the old people. I watched them and I saw what they did and heard what they said, but I also listened. And they were my guide. They were the people I wanted to be around. They were my mentors. And when they passed, I thought, now what am I going to do? And I found them again, all over Canada. I remember so many wonderful people, so many. We had so much in Nelson together, all our people. We were gathering and we were so happy to make that transition to reconcile with the church. The day of the apology just happened. It was my purpose. It was my time. It was time for all of us. I work now with Kathy Camilleri, and the church contracted her to do the workshop called The Village. And the village gets constructed as what we had before contact. We had it right. We had it right. And I didn't know what I was to do after I started, when I finished working with our people, and then I continued working with Kathy. We go into all the schools, the hospitals, the police stations. She's come across Canada with it. She's originally came from Manitoba, and she's been there a few times. And so our story is still going. It's still there. And I was told, when you do something, someone will come behind you and carry that on. And maybe after they're gone, someone will come and do that until it's done. I met Albert Lightning in UBC years ago. I was only in my 30s. And I've always wanted to meet him. And he came and sat beside me one day in the meeting room. And I thought, he must be Albert Lightning. I didn't know. Anyway, he came and sat beside me. And he spoke to us. And then something happened. Someone came into his body and used him. There was that transition, so visible. I knew why he came to sit beside me. I would understand what was going on. A lot of our people come to us that way. They come in vision, dreams, and they use you. It's very real. And that's how our people were so connected with the Creator and the land. We just had that connection. And that's how we lived. And I think we need to go on working together, accepting each other for who we are. We are all unique individual people, all of us. And I'm just really honored that I was able to come to tell you the story again. 30 years later, who would have thought? So I'm really honored to be here, and I commend the people who brought us here. Thank you. Thank you. Good luck, Tesla.
Your intervention it changed the course of our church's journey by what you did that day. What happened is the church, having heard this call for an apology, then had a year of preparation for the next general council. And that general council took place here in Sudbury in 1986. And at that general council, the commissioners crafted an apology while the elders waited down the hill in a teepee. And so now we are going to journey down that hill to the site where that teepee was, where today there is a cairn commemorating the apology. But before we do that, I'm going to ask the Very Reverend Stan McKay.
The walk down the hill has significant meaning for many people who are here today. I'd like you to meet one of them who is going to be down there with us. He was waiting in the teepee with a group of elders, women and men, 30 years ago. As we talked yesterday, I think he may be the only elder who is still with us from that group. I would like you to meet Elder Murray Wheaton. The request for the apology was marked by dignity and respect and gentleness, long-suffering. And so I give thanks to the Creator for the voice of Alberta, the strength of Murray. And I would ask you as you walk down or ride down to the place where the apology was made, that you would carry in your hearts the strength of our ancestors and the hope of those who are yet unborn. So Anishinaabe, so Anishinaabe, so Anishinaabe, so Anishinaabe. There's an Anishinaabe prayer that goes, Creator, look at our brokenness. We know that in all creation, only the human family has strayed from the sacred way. We know that we are the ones divided, and we know that we are the ones who must come back together to walk on the sacred way. Grandmother, grandfather, sacred one, teach us to love, to be compassionate and respectful, that we may heal the earth and heal each other. In the nas moa kisiman tu gasimamoya, so many mina. Deus.
We are very honored that Elder Art Patatagus from Atikameksheng First Nation is going to lead us now in a ceremony to begin this part of our journey. We are also joined today by the Wabishki Makwa singers, who you've already heard if you were down here early, and who will also play for us again after Art. So welcome Elder Art Patatagus.
We gathered around a place where I told them that we light up a fire. And I told them a story about how we started that fire. I said to them, over a period of time, we look back at our family, look back at the stories that were given to us by our parents, grandmas and grandpas. And in sitting there with my brother and other members of my family, we asked, Mom and Dad is not there now. Physically, they have been removed. They have been taken home to that spirit world, the home of our Creator. And now it is up to us to pick up that road. And Dad used to talk about going on ahead. And in his words, he would say, I'm going to plant flowers along the road at Anishinaabeg Meekan. Anishinaabeg Meekan, the little pathway that I'm going to leave. And when it's time for you to journey, to follow, you follow those flowers that I have planted. And then you will find your way. So I ask myself, what are these flowers? And then looking back through the years, I think about the stories about the hardships that my parents have endured. When my mother was a child, not far from here, she was burned out from her home. And I asked her, after having gone through this kind of trauma, having miners come into the community and burn everything that we had, whether or not she hated those men that had come in to do that kind of mischief, brought us this kind of pain and suffering. And without hesitation she said, no, I did not hate those men. I despised the behavior that they exhibited. I endured the pain and the suffering of the outcome of the burning of my home. But I did not lose my pathway. I can't teach you if I'm going to live like them. That's what I want you to learn. I want you to think about the love that is carried within inside our teaching. That's what I want you to learn. So if I follow those men, I cannot show you that. I cannot teach that. I have to live it myself. And in talking about taking care of the home, I watched her work and my father day after day, sometimes enduring that racism, being treated badly like you don't belong. And again I asked them about whether or not they hated, and they said no. Again they said, I cannot teach you if you are going to live like that and be like them. I want you to continue to carry the teaching from our ancestors. Follow what those words are saying, because that is what has carried us through the centuries of time and will carry us on into the centuries of time in the future. This is what we want your children to learn, how to carry those qualities in their heart in the way that they relate with nations of the world, people around within their families. At home, I share this with the children. This is what we miss when we see the addictions coming into our families. Those drugs, all those things that destroy when we follow that kind of lifestyle. It's been troubling for us to hold on to these teachings because we have had law passed to condemn and make outright evil in law the practices that we are carrying. And there is a fear that if it's known that we are teaching you these kinds of ideas, you may be taken and we will lose the next generation. Who will be left to carry on that teaching? So I thought about that and lighting up that fire and thinking about what is contained inside those practices. It's the words. You must learn what those words are expressing. The love and the kindness and the sharing. So we laid that out for you when we first met. We talk about the dish with one spoon. It says we are nations of the world and we take our food from our mother. We sat with you a second time and we created that Turo Wampum Belt. Again, we pointed out, I have a life with which I have been blessed. That's one of those roads that you see on that belt. And the one beside me speaks of my neighbor. My neighbor as a family, my neighbor as a partner, my neighbor as a nation of people. You have been given also instructions about how to live in harmony within your families. And you, in living here with me and coming to understand who I am, must come to see and know what my teachings are about. But you're also having to learn about how to respect them and to accommodate them. We laid that out in 1764 when we sat down with the Crown again from Great Britain. And we created this silver covenant chain. We bound our hearts together. We bound our nations together to be one. And when you look at speaking about those nations or that nation in that Turo Wampum Belt, we can make many roads there. Add a third line, a fourth line, a fifth line, a sixth line. Those additional lines that we put down on that pathway, we can describe them as the churches, the nations, the families, the brothers and sisters who all are required to live together in harmony. That's what that belt describes. But it also says that we're having to do some work. In that silver covenant chain, we said we do not make it from iron because iron rusts very quickly. We do not make it from copper, but copper is like that iron. We do not make it from gold, because gold, when you polish it, endures. We choose to make it from silver, because silver is like that gold, but it tarnishes in time. What we are having to do is to sit down and polish the chain. Sit down and polish that chain such that it never breaks. When you think about the links in that chain, those are the footsteps that we walk, the journeys that we make. When you follow our teaching, when you take a look at the role of Grandma and Grandpa, that's what they speak to. When they walk through those stages, it talks about planting and doing. The doing part is for Mom and Dad. The planting is Grandma and Grandpa. Looking back through time to take a look at what we are doing and the way that we are living, to ensure that we are going to plant good seeds which will produce those rich foods that we need. So in 1764 we sat down. These are the kinds of ideas that we captured and have brought forward. When we sat down in 1850 to make a treaty, we looked at those belts that we have gathered around and created in our journey. Those are periods of time, 300, 400 years. And we're looking on into the future, another 300 and 400 years of time. But each time we walk, we invite you to take a little stone and plant it. Each generation that comes, teach them how to plant that stone, about what it is that you want to bring into your house that's going to be productive, that's going to ensure that your children learn about love and kindness, sharing, those qualities that we all want to see. And when you suffer, the journey also says, I'm to reach over and visit those families and those people who are having those kinds of troubles. And I will reach out and take care of them, because that's my responsibility. So I asked my mom about how she lived, and I asked her about questioning whether or not anybody ever said thank you. She said, it's not a quality judgment that I am making. It's not about searching for praise. I am looking at my family. And it's because I love them that I put forward this hard work. Take a look back at what has been happening and think about, what am I going to do tomorrow, such that it's going to be more beneficial for all peoples, and for our First Nation peoples, our brothers and sisters, my family. That's what we want to see. I don't need hundreds and millions and billions of dollars. I would rather have your love and friendship. So, me much.
I'd like to share a little story before. When I was born, I was 2 pounds and some ounces. And my grandfather at that time held me up and prayed. And he said that I was going to live and I was going to be able to do things in life. And I was 10 years old when he passed away, but I always remembered when he talked to us grandchildren, he always said, there are bad times coming, sadness, sickness. It's like, he said, we're going to be going through a big, dark hole. But he said it's going to take time. Someday you're going to come out of that hole, and there's going to be light at the end of that tunnel. And I think that's what we've been through as a nation. And I share this story because when I went into ministry, I always wanted to know, why was it so wrong when my grandfather took his pipe, did ceremonies, sang those songs? He never joined the church. And also on my mother's side, he put everything away, all his regalia, the pipe, everything. And he joined the church. And he taught my mom, my aunties and the uncles to believe that this was wrong. And so when I went into ministry, I used to think of my grandfather's words. He said, someday we are going to come out of this. And when we have all witnessed what we went through, 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, and the 80s, and the 90s, up to this day. So I share those words, and I always remember, he must have knew that was his vision. He's seen it coming. So when I went into ministry, I always wanted to know, why was it so wrong? I wanted to learn. I wanted to know what the sweet grass was for. I wanted to know why are people dressed, at our powwows, ceremonies. And when we had the apology 30 years ago, I couldn't dress like that. So today I'm proud that I could wear moccasins and a ribbon dress. My outfit's not complete yet, but I know someday I will have it done. And I also want to share the story of 30 years ago. I shared the story back then. It was in July. My niece had passed away. She left 5 children. And at that night in the church, my mom wasn't with us. She was in Saskatoon at a Saskatchewan Treaty Women's Senators meeting. At the wake of the night, our relatives came from Manitoba. They came with the pipe, they came with the sweetgrass, they came with the feast food, and they came with the drum and the songs. They got there between 11 and 11:30, and they asked me, is it okay that we do this? And there was nobody around that was part of the board to get permission. So I said yes, but I know the consequences of saying yes. But I allowed them to do it. It was so beautiful. It felt so good in my heart to hear those songs, to smell the sweet grass, and also to hear those ceremony songs. And so next day the same thing happened. When my mother got home from the meeting, my aunties and some of the elders came over and they told my mother, Jessie, they said, you missed a beautiful service. Why did we have to lose a young mother in order for us to have all these things in the church? And they said, from now on, we're going to continue to do that. So this happened July 1986. So when I came to the apology, or when I came to General Council, August of 1986, I shared that story. From that time on now, we have been doing these things. And for me, it was a very good feeling. Like I was finally free. That I was no longer ashamed of being Indian, of who I was. I share that story with you today. But one of the things that I remember when we were all in the parking lot here, and then the teepees were up, and the elders were sitting over here, and they were talking, meeting about what was going to take place. And I know there was deep discussions. Some of them still weren't unsure of what was to be. Some were still afraid of the sweetgrass. Some wanted to move forward. And that was what they were waiting for the apology. But we look back in history and we see that across our land, we have all been waiting for this, waiting for that day, 1986. We had elders here, we had the youth here, we had the drummers here in the parking lot. And when you commissioners were coming down the hill singing, the moon was lit up here. I'll never forget that. In and out of the clouds, the drummers started to sing. And it was so beautiful. There was many crying. Many crying because, again, I shared that story that we finally are getting an apology. And at that freedom of knowing that we are going to walk a journey ahead, not knowing what was to come, but hopefully that there will be good things to happen in the future. We see many things changing now, but it is again up to each one of us. What are we going to do? What am I going to do in my own walk for my community, for my home, for my province, for my nation? And that is up to us, and that is what the Creator has left for us. But I give thanks to all our elders that were with us at that time. They're all gone from us. I think Marie is, one of the ones that are still with us. And I give thanks to the Creator for His life amongst us to help us keep that spirit strong, to help us to move ahead. And that is what we as the nation have to do, not only as Native people, but you as non-Native people. So share this story with you today, that as we go and move forward, let the Creator be with us. We cannot do it alone. We need the elders, the spirit of our elders that are gone, to help us make that journey. Because when they sat over there, they made that big change for all of us. Thanks be to God for them. Amen.
Thank you so much, Bernice. Well, and as the commissioners came down that hill, they gathered at the teepee.
Alberta, God bless her soul, said what she needed to say, what the Creator wanted her to say. I was stunned, but not for very long. And at that point, the United Church General Council staff and leaders began to prepare the preparatory materials that went out to all of the 380 commissioners and to the nearly 200 other support staff and others. And it set forth the story of the work that we had been doing, and it began our awareness of something called colonialism. I got to my feet from the smoky campfire. Murray said that he spent the whole time trying to keep my Al from getting into the fire, but I think that's apocryphal, Murray. In any event, I just stood there in the smoky, dark place, didn't know what to do. Nobody said anything. And then Edith Memnook got to her feet. Her daughter Janet is here today. And Edith came over to me and she opened her arms, and she said, "I've waited all my life to hear those words. For my own sake, for my children, and for my grandchildren." And then she said, "Of course, I forgive you." Now that's not the end of the story. Because after I came outside and read the apology to the great crowd and finished reading it, there was silence, there was weeping, the fires were burning, and everybody was standing there. I'm pretty good at increasing the size of congregations by estimating rather than counting, but I think there were at least 600 people there that night. And the silence was broken by Art Solomon, whose children are here today. And Art had a stentorian voice, and through the whole crowd rang out his words, "Now, what in the hell are they going to do about it?" And that statement, that challenge of Art's that night, formed the agenda for the next 30 years of my life. And it set the United Church on a course that I think has had profound importance for us all. We were determined that those words that we said were not empty words. And I think many of you know the kind of educational process in which we engaged, and we told the stories of the work and so on. But we had no idea at that point of what was about to emerge. It was before the Willie Blackwater trials, before the criminal trial in Alberni. It was before that whole series of exposures of the rot in the system, rot in which the church had been a willing and sometimes informed participant. And we spent those years of the trials and trying to say that there has to be a proper response to this. What you don't know is that for that period from 1986 through until the Iacobucci decision in the late 28 or 29, that it was necessary for the churches and for the federal government to repent by doing things, and to, among other things, to make a public apology, and then to set up the machinery that became the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, so that we were unwilling to say the word apology until the other churches, and in particular the federal government, said, we apologize too. So that's the backstory that we know, and I need to say that there were lots of other people besides the United Church, but our church, whatever power we had, was being devoted to seeing that the response of the Canadian people was one that was meaningful. That's enough of that, because Sarah said that she's got a hook, and I think she's going to find it if I don't stop talking. But what you really need to hear are these words. Long before my people journeyed to this land, your people were here. And you received from your elders an understanding of creation and of the mystery that surrounds us all, that was deep and rich and to be treasured. We did not hear you when you shared your vision. In our zeal to tell you the good news of Jesus Christ, we were closed to the value of your spirituality. We confused Western ways and culture with the depth and breadth and length and height of the gospel of Christ. We imposed our civilization as a condition of accepting the gospel. We tried to make you be like us, and in so doing we helped to destroy the vision that made you what you were. And as a result, you and we are poorer, and the image of the Creator in us is twisted, blurred, and we are not what we were meant by God to be. We ask you to forgive us and to walk together with us in the Spirit of Christ, so that our peoples may be blessed and God's creation healed. May the work continue. Megwitch.
Thank you, Bob. Another part of our story is hearing and receiving the apology. Gladys Taylor responded personally to the apology in 1986, and Edith Memnook responded on behalf of the All Native Circle Conference in 1988. And as Bob mentioned, members of their families are with us here today, and we are so blessed to have you here. And so Puckwith Johnson and Rhonda Taylor from Gladys's family, and Shirley and Janet Hunter from Edith's family are here, and I invite you to come forward and to share your memories and your stories.
I'm Rhonda Taylor, and Mrs. Puckwith, and our mother Gladys was here. And 30 years ago, gi Bobby O'Gavin ma Gladys to non-dang gi gdwin gi gira nigon sid ma na me gamgong and look keyword. That I'll translate that for you. 30 years ago, Gladys was here, and she waited to hear this apology that the higher ups in the church. She wanted to hear what they had to say for this apology, and so when she came home, and I was home, and I questioned her. I said, Gi gwajmadash Gladys piad bitgushing. I said to her, I questioned her when she come home. I said to her, well, Mum, we're gonna nandam eu gigdwin apology as Nikodad. I said, Mum, what do you think of this apology that they gave to you? And I said, tell me what you think of it. So she says, Mida Shira acted Gladys. It is a long time coming, this apology. What will they say? This is what she was telling me she was thinking. What will they say? Will it mean anything? At last, after many hours of waiting, word came down. Gladys was not too pleased with the apology at first, but as time passed, she said it would be good for her children and her grandchildren. She knew her children would not have to go through what others had. It took years for the church to recognize their wrongdoing, and Mom said, an apology is only words unless it comes from the heart and said with compassion. She also said, it's the right thing to do. Admit to their mistakes. She was skeptic at times, but realized it too would take years to take hold. Puckwith and I are honored to be here with where Mom was so many years ago. It's like Jimmy Gwetchke, Gibby Shaig Mom. Say something, Mom.
I have to lower this. I am Migwetch, Kinamai Bishaig. Of Chicana, Kero Monet, Mon, Kanwab the Mon, so gosh, Chicago, Quen Maxama Mama, keep on Segwen. Jakon Chicogan in Gikino Mama, she was a strong woman, full of faith, and I have gained some of that faith from her. It's amazing what it does. So if I could, I'll just say a little prayer, what I learned from my mother. Ganama. Shamini do. Chimigre, Samai Bishayong. King. Samagabinon Vijong. Wido Kuyong, Sachim Shkauziong. Saki Kedmong. Saki Ktam Goziong, Chishue Baksa. Chiki doing, Sakanok Nagawadi, Chimenja. Chimigres, Shannido, Sakaba, and Mijong Shkauziwin. We do Krishnong, Sakaba Chibikit and now song. Cognic Sapiwijushino. Sa cognic Chinigon Winion. Sa Nigon Cognic Chinabion. Keen sa Penamayon. Keen sa Amishion. Sayum Skauziwen. Keen at Epoet Tagoya.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Creator for today, and I'd like to thank the words and the teachings of Elder Art. Today it was an honor to sit in his presence. I'm Shirley Hunter, and I'm the granddaughter of Edith Mimlip and my auntie Janet Hunter here. We'd like to thank the United Church for giving us this opportunity to journey to the east, to this place. I had this paper and a paper full of notes, and Janet left it in the vehicle. But I said, I pray that my grandmother's spirit is with us today. And that I believe she is. I think it was Doug who said, here's this little old lady who got up and said, finally, this is what I waited for all my life. When he said that, I said, yeah, that's my grandmother. She was the type of lady who would speak her mind and speak from her heart. And I think that is what I must do today as well. The one thing that I take away from this ceremony and today and the acknowledgement is the love and the care that exists. But a little bit further than that is the acceptance of who we are. I believe when those elders sat here 30 years ago, there was pain and there was hurt and there was shame and fear. And from that point on, I thank the United Church and I thank those elders for having the courage to recognize the pain and the suffering of our people, and for that to stop and for healing to take place and for the love to come. And because I believe as humans we all come from a place of love. And I know the place that my grandmother came from was from that place. To be able to accept the apology, to put it in the context of Christ himself being able to forgive those who crucified his son. And I know my grandmother taught us about forgiveness. To be able to accept one another and not to hold judgment on one another. My experience today, my experience today has been that. To see the welcomeness here and the love and the acceptance. And I encourage each and every one of us to walk on that path, to share not only here, but back home in our home fires, where Elder Art talked about placing that stone and lighting up that fire and inviting the good things to our fire. We do that at home as well. Last night I prayed, and I didn't expect to come up here and speak. Although in my heart I thought, I bet there'll be an opportunity for our family to speak on behalf of my grandmother. And so in my prayers I invited my grandmother, and I called her Mama No. We knew her as Mama No. To bring what she can to me in my sleep, so I can share with you. And eagles came in my sleep. And Reverend Wright bought an eagle feather from back home that was gifted to him. And this eagle feather has a yellow and a blue ribbon in it. Although I too am learning very much about our old teachings and our ceremonies. When I saw this feather, I saw this yellow and this blue, and I thought, how appropriate, because the yellow comes from the east, where I am today. And the yellow represents new beginnings. And I recognized the apology was about new beginnings. And this day, recognizing the 30th anniversary, continues to be about new beginnings for many of us. And the blue comes from the west. And the blue represents a place of healing. And this feather has the two colors and the ribbons wrapped around it. And I recognize the healing that has taken place in the last 30 years. And I recognize the need for continued healing for our people and our communities and our families. My grandmother's work was teaching our ways to the youth. She worked in an adolescent treatment center for youth who were addicted to drugs and alcohol, who had no identity and were very lost and did not know their culture and lost their way. And sometimes that pain took them to really dark places where they wanted to take their lives. And that was grandmother's work. And as her granddaughter, we must continue. I am a grandmother now, and I continue to teach my children, my grandchildren. And the healing must continue. And I am so overwhelmed with the people here and your love that you carry and your words. And I encourage the conversations to continue. That 30 years ago, the work started with an apology, with reaching out and asking for that apology. And more so, accepting that apology and being able to be as human being as possible, to be able to forgive and to be able to love others. And I know in my heart, these are the things my grandmother would have liked to share. Would she have been here today? Thank you.
These big babies. But anyways, Shirley reminds me of Mom very much because she can talk and doesn't know when to stop. We used to tell my mom, Mom, make it short and sweet, or else we go like this to her while she's talking, eh? But I'm really glad to be here. I'm really enjoying myself. Thank you. Hi, hi.
This text that we heard from 2 Corinthians is a timely text for our church at this time. It speaks of reconciliation, but I just want to kind of look a little more closely at it begins by saying, if anyone's in Christ, there's a new creation. All the old stuff has passed away, and everything is made new. We're going to come back to that. Then it goes on to say that all of this, this reconciliation, this new life, it all comes from God. God's the initiator. God has taken the initiative to heal the relationship, the human-divine relationship, which is a remarkable thing. Because in that relationship, God is the injured party. God is the one who's been abandoned. God is the one who has been rejected. We are the ones who have broken the covenant. And yet it is God who takes the initiative to heal the relationship and does that in a way that is self-sacrificing, in a way that is completely free, where we're free even to reject the offer of reconciliation. But God just puts God's self out there. We're told that this is God's primary action in Christ, is to heal this relationship. So God takes all that brokenness into God's self as a way of healing the relationship. This is important for us to note, because as we dive into the work of reconciliation, this text helps to unpack for us what it costs, what it requires of us to actually begin and engage in that work of reconciliation. It's costly. It's self-sacrificing. It must be freely given, and those that we want to reconcile with are free to reject our overtures. And yet we continue to offer. Then Paul goes on to say, oh, that is quite the message. Paul goes on to say that God has begun this work of reconciliation, but it's not done. Reconciliation doesn't just, it's not a one-time thing. It's not like we say we're sorry and it's done. But it's an ongoing process. And the work was begun in Jesus, and now we are invited to be part of it, which again is a remarkable thing. When you think about how we were the ones who God was reaching out to and saying, I want to heal this relationship with you. Now I need you also to be participants and in fact ambassadors of this message of reconciliation, because it's only just begun. We're going to come back to that too. The journey of reconciliation will change everything. Will make everything new. That is an incredible promise. But it's also, that can be a little challenging. Because when everything is made new, it means that even the things I kind of like the way they are going to change. Those are going to pass away as well, so that everything can be made new. Now that's a hard word. I want change. I long for change. I long for change in my heart. I long for change in our church. I long for change in our country. But there are some things I like the way they are. Desmond Tutu and Mpho Tutu, in their book, the title of which eludes me at the moment, it's on being forgiving. It's about forgiving. They talk right at the beginning about transformation, and that before we can be transformed, we have to become willing to be transformed, and that's often the hardest part. And so they talk about, in order to become willing to be transformed, we got to pray. We got to ask for the willingness to allow ourselves to be transformed, and then we got a whole lot of prayer and work to do to actually be transformed. And I find for myself, I'm often still at that place of being willing to be transformed. I want the change. But do I want to change? Sometimes changes look like transformation. Sometimes when things are new, when they're different, when we stop doing something, it looks like we have changed. But we got to look at the roots, not the surface, to see if real transformation has taken place. So as I've been going around the country and talking with folks, I have heard again and again from elders, from folks in First Nations and Métis communities, I've heard folks say, the residential schools, they're done at last. But then we had the 60 scoop, which was just another way of taking kids out of their, Indigenous kids, out of their homes and putting them in non-Indigenous contexts, and another way of destroying culture and destroying identity. And then after the 60 scoop, the whole child welfare system continued in a variety of ways through the foster care system, and again taking children out of their communities, away from their families, and again placing them in a context where identity is lost. And I've heard folks also say that the new residential schools are the jails. And once again, people are being taken out of their homes and out of their communities and being placed in a context where identity and healing are lost. And so we have change, but we don't have transformation. And sometimes I wonder, I struggle, even in our church, with change and transformation. And we've just been, and we are still, in the midst of a whole comprehensive review process where we want to be transformed as a church. And I want to just encourage us to really look for transformation and not simply change. That things can be different and the same, all at the same time. That how we make decisions and how we come to a new place is probably more important than the new place we come to. If we're getting to a new place by the same old roots, that it isn't really a new place at all. It's just a new expression of an old place. Something that Bentley said reminds me of when we talk about transformation. Paul says it here, like everything is made new. Part of opening ourselves to reconciliation is opening ourselves to an awareness of exactly what it is that's broken. And the Bible, in its beautiful apocalyptic way, and so many of its texts that seem to befuddle us, try to tear away the veil so we can see just exactly how big that brokenness is. That's a whole other sermon that I'm not going to give you right now. But on the apocalyptic literature, that's its role, is to just say, you think it's bad, it's so much big, so much worse, it's so much worse. The good news, of course, is that it doesn't stay there. At least it doesn't have to. So when Bentley was talking about, we are in the decade now of apologies to and acknowledgement of the whole history of what has happened to people of African descent in our world. That's another piece of the colonial history. That history cannot be separated from the history in this country of colonialism and injustice and residential schools and 60 scoop and. And when we were in El Salvador, a group of us from Canada were invited recently to attend a Peace and Reconciliation Conference in El Salvador, which was initiated by one of our partners, Miguel Tomas of the Emmanuel Baptist Church. And he was inspired to initiate this effort of the churches in his country because of what we have done here in Canada around the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And he saw that as as perhaps a model or an avenue forward for El Salvador to address the obscene levels of violence and conflict and between the army and the police and the gangs and so they invited us to this conference to share some of our story. And so Charlene Burns, who is a residential school survivor, and myself both presented on our behalf at that conference. And Charlene talked about her experience in the schools, and I talked about my experience as a settler in this church and what I was coming to understand, and what I was coming to understand as the work before me. And also how we got to where we are today. Afterwards, one of the fellows from Emmanuel Baptist Church came up to me and he said, I am so full of emotion right now. I am feeling so incredibly filled with hope by your stories that real, profound transformation can happen even where the hurts are so deep. And he says, and I am also feeling incredible shame. Because in our context here in El Salvador, indigenous voices, indigenous culture has simply been erased. We have not, as a church, even begun to acknowledge the presence and the gifts of indigenous people in this land. We continue to participate in the suppression of that culture and that wisdom. He says, you've opened my eyes to work we need to do. And again, I was struck by the connections. By the colonial history is not about one small piece, but rather it is a whole mindset, a whole way of operating, a whole way of imagining societies are supposed to work. And that's the foundation on which we have built our society and we have built our church. And so that transformation is going to destroy, erode, eliminate, pass away that foundation so that all things can be made new. So that we can refound our country, we can refound our church, we can refound our lives on a foundation that is about mutuality and justice and respect and equity and love. This will not be easy work. This will change each of us individually and all of us together, transform us. And if it doesn't, then we're not doing it. I think it was you, Alberta, yesterday. No, I'm sorry. It was Elder Art Patatagoose who said yesterday, we know the value of a teaching not by its source, but by what it produces. We need to look at the products. So I wanted to share with you a little story about the beginnings of my journey towards reconciliation. As I acknowledged to the young people, I was not their age when I began to understand the transformation that I was in need of. I was much older. It was, in fact, well, it really began in 1988. Because that's when I started working at the Alberta Youth Animation Project on Southern Africa. We called it IAPSA. And that was a project to educate young people in Alberta, and particularly in the churches, but also beyond the churches, about apartheid in Southern Africa, in South Africa, and its reaches into the whole region of Southern Africa, and also racism in Canada. And so as part of that work, I had the privilege of organizing and providing leadership to a group of young people who went over to Southern Africa for an exposure experience to kind of see firsthand the impacts and reality of apartheid on the ground, with the idea that we would come back and be a team then of educators in Alberta. And this was in 1990 that we went over. And so we did see firsthand. We saw in Namibia that as the South African army was leaving Namibia, as they found their independence as a nation, that the army just, they burnt everything behind them. They destroyed infrastructure, they blew up roads, they left nothing for the people to begin the rebuilding of their nation. And we saw in South Africa the absolute horrors of apartheid. We visited with youth and with women's groups, with folks who had been tortured. We were there in the midst of the apartheid era. And I felt welling up in myself an incredible hatred, an incredible anger towards white South Africans. How could they allow this? How could they participate in this? How could they not know? They can see what's happening. And how could they remain silent? And I felt an incredible amount of judgment towards whites in South Africa. And hearing that in my words, our partners at the South African Council of Churches challenged me. They said, you need to learn your history. You need to go home and find out what's going on in your own backyard. Because the homeland system, the Bantustan system that they had in South Africa under apartheid, that separated blacks, gave them their own homeland, and established, the apartheid regime established leaderships for those homelands, which was a way of keeping them separate and out of sight. That was based on the Canadian reserve system. A delegation from South Africa came to Canada, studied our reserve system, and went back and used it as a template for the Bantustans. The pass system, which had also been in place in South Africa, where blacks couldn't leave their areas without a pass, and they could be stopped at any time and asked for this special identification, and if they didn't have it, they were in serious trouble. That was also based on the Canadian pass system that was implemented in the West, in Western Canada. People were not allowed to leave the reserve without a special pass, and it was up to the government to issue or not issue a pass. That was humbling. I came back from South Africa in August of 1990. And for those of you who are kind of doing that math, you realize that that was smack in the middle of the Oka crisis. And that was the moment when I first began to understand the connections. And I first began to understand that I was complicit, that I was, in my context, the white South African. It took me a while to come around to where Jesus got to real quick. Because I turned all of that hatred and resentment that I had been feeling towards whites in South Africa at myself and at whites in Canada. Jesus took a different route. Jesus responded with compassion, with an understanding that we are in our own ways all complicit, all participants in systems of injustice for various reasons and in various ways. And rather than condemn us, Jesus longed to liberate us. That's how much he loves us. And it's why he subverted the status quo all the time. See, to become ambassadors of reconciliation, this invitation that God issues to be ambassadors of reconciliation is actually an invitation to accept liberation for ourselves. Because what was so obvious to me in South Africa is that the humanity of white South Africans was as twisted and distorted and denigrated as the humanity of black South Africans. that apartheid did not allow anyone to be fully human. If that was true in South Africa, it was true in Canada, which means that my own humanity was at stake. My ability to be all that God has created me to be, our ability to be all that Creator has created us to be, is jeopardized by our complicity and our participation in systems of injustice. And so the work of reconciliation is an offer of liberation from that which distorts and twists our very core. Which is an incredible gift. And it's shocking then that Paul has to plead with the Corinthians to accept this gift. To plead with them. Because as amazing as that gift is, it does mean all things are made new. Which means that those systems that distort my humanity and your humanity also at the very same time give me an illusion of something good. They privilege me in my particular identity. They privilege me. I have access to all kinds of opportunities that many of my relatives do not, because of the color of my skin and the level of education that I have and the language that I speak and the way my body functions. And that privilege is part of what's twisting me. But, oh man, do I enjoy it. I really do. And so Paul has to plead with the Corinthians and plead with us to see and understand that the making new of all things, the eliminating, in fact, of the privileges, of the disparity, of the imbalance, is gift to every single one of us. That is the transformation that is offered. And Jesus understood how hard it was for people to accept that. And so he preached all the time against the dominant culture's so-called wisdom. He constantly subverted the sort of common wisdom of his day. He said things like, the last shall be first. And it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God. And he said, love your enemies and do good to those who hate you. And blessed are the poor. And he said, to enter the kingdom of heaven, you need to become like a child. So I want to share another story with you that was recently shared with me. A story about children, about a child. So a friend of mine told me this story that her granddaughter, her 2-year-old granddaughter and her were at an event that a whole bunch of people were at, and sitting a few rows in front of them, she could see a mother there with a stroller, somebody in the stroller. And what she observed is that other people around, the mothers and fathers and aunties were telling their kids, don't play with that kid. Stay away from it. Just leave them be. So my friend's granddaughter went marching over there to see what's what, and saw in the stroller this very young boy who had a skin condition. He had eczema all over him. It's just covered in eczema spots. And she noticed that his wrist, at one of the little dry spots, had sort of cracked open and was bleeding. And she said, oh, I know how you can get better. Come with me, and took his hand and led him over to her grandmother and said, I had a boo-boo on my finger right here, you see? Here I had a scrape, and my grandma kissed it, and now it's better. So she can make you better. Grandma, will you kiss him better? Grandma looks up and sees that the mom is watching and smiling, and the boy smiling and offering his wrist, and so she says, of course. And so she takes his wrist and she kisses it. And then her granddaughter says, oh, now you will get better, because her kisses make things better. She does it with love. Then the two of them went back over to this boy's mother, and what happened next, over the next few minutes, the other children started gathering around, and within a few minutes they were all playing together. She does it with love. The transformation that we need is to recognize that we are all relatives. We all belong to one another. There is no us and them. There is only us. We need to restore community, the way that little girl restored community, knowing that love was strong enough to do that. Love is the only thing strong enough to overcome the kinds of hurts and barriers and harms of our past and our present. And so I don't think I can actually say better than Ron Klesmeyer and John Oldham have what it looks like when we allow love to transform us, when we allow love to open our hearts to see in each other relatives, to open our hearts to truly respect and truly work together with all our relations to heal this planet, to heal our divisions, to transform the foundation of our society so that colonial history remains in the past and our future looks different. So I would invite us to sing together, to sing with our voices and our hearts, Sweetgrass and Candle, and to pay attention to the words as we do so. Miigwech.